All right, guys, so the old rack and pinion is out and it's time to go back in with the new one. So you can see here we got this big gaping hole that's ready for the new rack and pinion to slide in. The first thing that we need to do is transfer anything necessary off of the old rack and put it onto the new one. It looks like we're going to need to transfer this low pressure output fitting over, and that is a 17 millimeter, so we'll go ahead and do that. We've got the hardware that I took out in the places where they're going to go when it goes back in the car. The only other thing on here right now that I see, it already has the solenoid valve orifice there, so we don't need to take that off. A lot of them don't come with this, and so you'd have to reuse the one that's on your old rack, but I'm glad that this one came with that. And we're not going to do anything right now with our tie rod ends. So I'm going to say let's swap over this one fitting here and see if we can't get her back up in there. All right, so as I mentioned, this is a 17 millimeter to release this fitting, but it's more than just a screw-in thing. Look here, we've got this little O-ring on there, and you see how it's kind of a, I don't know, wedge shape now from just the years of use. So we're going to go ahead and replace that O-ring, and then we'll go ahead and screw it in here where it goes on the new one. All right, so we got our new O-ring on there, and I put a little bit of thread sealant on the threads of this thing, and we'll just put it in place here on the new rack. Again, 17 millimeter. We'll make it nice and tight. Probably no specific torque spec for this, just good and tight. There we go. All right, so this guy, let me get these bolts out of it, but it is ready to go slide in place. I'm going to go ahead and take these out just so they don't get hung up. It'll be a lot easier to push all of this stuff through the engine mount and underneath the prop shaft. All right, in preparation of sliding the new rack and pinion in here, I'm going to go ahead and lower down the subframe here. I've had this sort of propping it up just a little bit. I'm going to try and get as much room as possible out of this subframe. And so I've got the front mounting points of the subframe loose but not completely down, and I'm going to, obviously these are completely out, and I'm going to pull it down just a little bit just to get as much space here underneath the engine mount and underneath the prop shaft to slide the new one in. So the new one goes in just like the old one here from the driver's side, and just like the old one, we're going to have to rotate it so that the brackets look right up through here. We're going to have to rotate it so that those brackets right there will fit underneath the parts there that they've got to go through, so just like that. Okay, so now we've got this bracket here underneath the engine mount. We'll see if we can pull it through. There it goes through the engine mount, and then you see it hitting right here on the sway bar, so we can we can swing that sway bar up and out of the way again, and then pass it by there, and then it slid. Come look right back here, and just that small push, it slid underneath the prop shaft. There we go. That is where it goes, and now we're ready to put our retaining bolts up through the subframe. Now we're ready to put our retaining bolts for the rack and pinion up through their spots here, but we need to make sure that this hole lines up with the hole in the rack and pinion. So look up through that hole and tell me when you see light, when they're lined up. Let me see. Oh, I can see some light through there. There, that looks pretty lined up. Let me see if I can get the bolt through there now. Yep, it's going. There we go. All right, now look up here. And you can see it's sticking up, and I'm going to put my retaining nut on that side so it can't fall back down through. Good. Now let's do it for the other side, and since we've got that bolt in on that side, this one ought to be a lot easier to line up, and it is. It just goes right through there. Then we can take our retaining nut, and again, just get it started so that the things can't fall back through. Great. Okay, so that is the rack and pinion back in its home where it should go. Now we can go ahead and raise this subframe back up and reconnect our engine mount here, and then all of the components, the brackets and things to the rack and pinion. So before I raise this subframe up, I'm noticing that I've got really good access to the nut that's on the retaining bolt for the rack and pinion here. So I'm gonna go ahead and take advantage of that while I have access to it, and I'm going to get my 21mm wrench on that nut right here, like that. That way I can hold it while I tighten it from below. Again, 21 on both sides. There, that's good and tight. And I'm gonna go ahead and come over here to this side. And you can see the nut on this side. And I'm gonna see if I can't do the same while I have good access to, there we go, both sides. Nice. And I'll give you the torque spec for these down below. Well, that was really slick, having good access to this top nut for the retaining bolts of that rack and pinion. So the next thing I need to do is reconnect my engine mount here. And so I'm gonna have to raise the subframe back up, and I'm trying to line up these pins to go back into these holes here in the frame. Need to line up these pins to go back in those holes, and also line up these bolts where they will screw into the subframe down here. So let's get that started. Let's go up a little bit. As I'm going up, I'm just looking to make sure that nothing's getting pinched in here, and I'm going to go up until this engine mount is just about touching the subframe right through here. Can you see this little gap right through there? We want to close that gap right there. So I'm going to keep going up until that engine mount is almost touching. There we go. And I've still got some wiggle room on that engine mount. I need that because as I put these bolts back in there, I need to be able to line them back in. So these bolts, when they came out, had some blue Loctite on it. So anytime you see Loctite, add it back when you put it back together. You see, I'm able to wiggle this thing around, this mount around, so that I can line up these bolt holes. There's that one. Let me get the next one. Wiggle it until I can grab a couple of threads, and I know that they're lined up. There, that one's in. That one's in. These are 16mm, and there's two on the back side that we're going to go look at and line up next. All right, so here's the back side of that engine mount. You've got two more 16mm bolts. And again, we've got a little bit of play in that engine mount so that we can line these bolts up with the holes that they screw into back here. And it's a little bit of a fiddly job, but just try to find how you can line up your bolts and get your hand in there the right way. And looks like I might need something to kind of pry it around. Oh, there we go. See how that one just fell right into place? I was able to wiggle it with my hand because I've still got just a little bit of room between this mount and that subframe. Let me see if I can get this last one. I know you won't be able to see it too good, but it's right back up here. Let's see if I can get that one lined up as well. I want to make sure that you get all of these. There we go. You can see it now. Got it started. You want to start everything by hand. Why is that? So we don't cross thread stuff. There we go. Now the tool that I found that gets onto these best is this flex head ratcheting wrench, 16mm. I can get that up in here and get it on that bolt. This is how I got them out. This is how they're going back in. You get this up there, and that flex head allows that movement. And of course, it's enough. I can do it by hand right now, but once it gets too hard to do by hand, that's where this flex head ratchet comes in clutch. All right, so I got the two on the back side or the front side of this engine mount in there, and I've started these by hand. I'm gonna go ahead and bring those home. 16mm. Got a little bit of a flexible flex head 16 on here. There we go. And we're not going to tighten it up because there's still, look right down here, there's still a little bit of a gap between the subframe and that engine mount. So we'll close that before we completely tighten these, and I'll give you again the torque spec. All right, let's close the gap between subframe and engine mount by raising that subframe. You can see this gap right here. Get close and closer, and we just need this little pin to go in here, and the same on this side right here. That little pin has to go up inside of there, and as long as that happens, we know that we're lined up. But this is probably good. We've closed the gap now between our engine mount and our subframe, so I'm gonna go ahead and tighten these 16mm bolts on this engine mount. Now that our engine mount is nice and secure, we're going to go ahead and continue to raise our subframe up until these pins go into the frame there. And so you can see, as long as you kept the front bolts in the subframe, the back bolts should just swing right back up where they go. We'll get the bolt and its little bracket here. And again, we put a little Loctite on that. Just put it up in there, and you ought to be able to feel it when they get close like that. You see, I'm not even all the way up, but I'm able to start by threading it by hand into the hole there. And then on this side, come right back up here, this side will lift up and go line up with those holes. So that's how you know that you're lined up. And if you look on top of this bracket right here, there's a little bit of a pin, and that pin goes up into a hole right there. So all those things line up, you know you're in the right spot and you're good to put the bolts in. So let's get those bolts ready. The back side has these two 16mm bolts. There it is, started by hand. A little bit of Loctite on them. There we go. All right, so we'll go ahead and continue to raise this up until we close the gap right here. So let me put this somewhere where you guys can see. Let's keep on raising this up. There we go. See how that pin goes inside of that hole in the frame there? That's how we know that we're lined up right. And we can go ahead on this other side, and we can get our other frame mount right here and get it started too. Same situation. We're going to put this bolt in there. We're going to start it by hand. There we go. And then we're going to make sure that this back side lines up with the holes. And it does. Start them by hand. There we go. Good. That's the way. I like it. Big bolts are 21s. Small ones are 16. I'll get you the torque spec here in a second. Come down here, get our 21. Closed up that gap. Got nice and tight. Turn it on to our 16 now. And come back here and close this up. Okay, now other side. We're just sucking them close. We're just sucking them up. That's why I've got a chrome socket. Don't use chrome sockets on impacts when you're really having to give it the beans, because this stuff can crack and shrapnel shoot all over the place. You always want to use these black oxide impact rated sockets. All right, so we got the back of the subframe reconnected. We never took the bolts out of the front of the subframe here. We just loosened them up. So we're going to tighten those back up. 21mm. There we go. You come and do it on this side too. 21mm. We'll give you the torque specs here in a second. There we go. Subframe is back up in place, and we're ready to move on to all of the accessories that are part of this steering rack. So now that the subframe is back in place, we can go ahead and take these supports down and move them out of our way. Gives ourselves just a little bit more freedom to maneuver down here. There we go. Always want to keep a clean work environment. Safety third. Okay, good. All right, so we don't need the flexibility anymore that releasing these hangers did for us on the muffler. So we can go ahead and reinstall these hangers on the muffler. So let me show you how to do that. It might help to put a little bit of WD-40 or some kind of lubricant in these holes or on these little studs. But a lot of times you don't need anything. You just push this up, put that hanger back in place, and then just push it until it goes over the little lip there. We'll do it on the same thing on this other guy. Just push up on your muffler, push back on your hanger. There we go. Now that's all back together. See, the factory service manual said to drop this whole exhaust pipe right here. But there's so much rust on these bolts and the gaskets and everything. I found that I didn't need to do that. All I really needed to do to give myself a little bit of flexibility so that I could move this, so that I could move the subframe down, was just to undo these hangers. So let's go ahead. We've got the rack and pinion centered up by turning or counting the number of turns one direction and the other direction, so lock to lock. It was a little over 3 turns, so 1.5 turns is centered up, and that's where this blue tab is. And then this opening right here in the steering shaft is the centered up position of our steering wheel. I went upstairs and checked, make sure that's centered. Now I'm going to try and slide this blue tab right down the center of that opening and then bring this on down into place. It needs to come down a little bit further. I'm going to have to tap it down with a little hammer or something. This is where you got to get a little creative sometimes to figure out what tools you need to get the job done. Yeah, the pry bar seems to be helping quite a bit. Bring that down. We just need it to where we can pass our bolt through. There we go. That went home. Let's see if we can get our bolt through there, a retaining bolt, to hold that thing in place. We'll know because it'll slide right in here, go through, and then just like that. So we are in place with our steering shaft, and we can tighten this bolt in place. All right, so we've got the steering shaft back down onto our spline shaft of our steering gearbox, and we've got a nice locking bolt in place. And so now we are ready to move ahead and go ahead and tidy up some of the other parts of this that need put back together. So one of the easy ones, come around this side, one of the easiest ones we can do right now is we can plug our little solenoid back in here, and that just comes in here, nice satisfying click, and then you can put your connector back there, hang it back where it was, keep those wires nice and safe. Well, I lost my lovely assistant who does the good job of filming for us. I apologize, but I'm going to try and do the best I can because I want you guys to be able to see everything you need to see so that you can do this job as quickly and as easily as possible for yourself. So let's get into it. So we got the rack in here. We got the steering column attached again. We've got our engine mount attached again. Now the next thing we need to do is put our hoses, our high pressure, which goes down here, and low pressure lines back on, and then also reattach this bracket over here that goes attached to the rack right there. But since this bracket is also attached to our high pressure line, we need to leave it loose for now just because it gives us more flexibility. Let me pull those down for you so you can see. It gives us a little bit more flexibility with these lines as we can as we need to hook them back together. And so we'll just go ahead and slide this one back in place. That's our low pressure, and then we'll move our clamp down. But this one, it takes that banjo bolt, and that banjo bolt, you have to be very careful. Make sure that you put a copper washer on both sides of this fitting, okay? To use the copper washers that came off of the old rack if you want, if they're still in good shape. If not, you need to get you 2 new copper washers. So we're going to put that banjo bolt in now. Okay, so here's the high pressure line, and hopefully you guys can see I've got a copper washer on both sides of that banjo bolt. And you want to make sure that you thread this bolt in by hand. Make sure it's going in nice and smooth, it's not cross-threading. If you get this cross-threaded, it'll never seal up and you'll always have a really bad leak right there. But this is a 14 millimeter, so once you get it tightened up by hand, you can go in here with your 14 millimeter wrench. You want to snug that up really nicely. So there we go. We've got the high pressure line here tight, 14 millimeter there, and we put the clamp back on our low pressure hose that goes back up towards the reservoir there. So now we can come over and follow that high pressure line over the prop shaft, and it has a bracket right here that we can reattach to the steering rack, and that's held on with two little bolts that we took out. So let me grab those. All right, let's get in here and let's get the bolts back in. Push this back into place. A little tricky with one hand, but not too bad. And these are 10 millimeter bolts, these two are. We'll just get them started by hand a little bit. Now before we get too carried away with putting all the little pieces back together and securing this thing in place, we've got the high pressure and low pressure lines hooked up. We've got the steering column attached to it. And so I'm going to go ahead, and I would highly recommend you do this as well, and that is test the steering rack, make sure that it works correctly, make sure that the pump is able to move fluid through it correctly, make sure there's no leaks before you go to the effort of getting everything put back together, just in case there's an issue with it, especially in this case, since we bought this thing off eBay as a new part that was relatively inexpensive. Makes me a little suspect that it might not be the highest quality part. So I want to be sure that this thing isn't leaking, that it works before I go put everything back together. That way I have less to do if I have to actually remove it to replace it right now. So let's go ahead and begin refilling the system. So read on the top of your cap here what you're supposed to use. This one says use Dextron type ATF, fill to proper level. So it gives you the proper levels here, and we've got ourselves some ATF here suitable for Dextron Murano. Okay, so that's what we're going to put in here, and we'll go ahead and put some in there. Then we'll start the car. We'll top this reservoir off, and we'll turn the wheel lock to lock a few times, and that'll suck this fluid down with the pump, the assistance of the pump. It'll suck this fluid in and move it through our steering rack, and then we'll go ahead and check that steering rack for leaks and function, and then we'll if everything looks good, we'll go ahead and button up all the rest of the steering rack and pinion and tie rod ends and sway bars and all of that. All right, so I've filled up this reservoir with the Dextron ATF, and without starting the car, I'm going to go in here and just turn the wheel side to side and see if it will draw some of that fluid down into the into the rack. So we can get the little apparatus we had here to lock the steering wheel in place undone now, and our seat belt out of the way. Okay, and we don't have it tied into any of the tie rod ends, so this is super easy to turn back and forth, and I'll go ahead and do it a couple of times. Lock to lock. Okay, 1.5 turns back to center. Okay, let's go see if it sucked any down. And no, it did not. Okay, so that level is still right where it was when I filled it up. So you're not going to get it to suck any down into the system by just moving your wheel. Okay, you're going to have to turn on the pump so that it circulates through the system. So I turned on the car and I rotated or went lock to lock with the steering 2 or 3 different times, and it dropped the level just about a 1/4 inch or so. So not as much as I expected. I kind of expected it would drain completely down. So that just probably tells me that the pump hasn't quite sucked all of that fluid down through the system, or that they had the steering rack already filled with a lot of fluid. So either way, we will continue to do this. At first, when I started it, you could definitely hear the pump whining, and then the pump whining quit as it started to draw the fluid down and start to lubricate the inside of that pump. But I'm going to put it up in the air, check for leaks here real quick, and then if everything's looking good, then I'll go ahead and start buttoning up the system. All right, let's see if there was any leaks when we did the little test there. So we're going to check our hoses here. Here's our return line, it's dry. more importantly, here's our pressure line. I'm going to look down at the bottom of that banjo fitting, and I don't see any wetness there, so that's good. Because it's a new part and there's often some quality control issues with new stuff, check all of the fittings that come from the factory put together, like that one there. Just make sure that they got those tight at the factory. Around this side here, this is where we were leaking from on the old one, and that looks dry. These fittings here look dry. Where the little solenoid attaches looks dry. Check your boots. You know, we didn't run it long enough for it to fill up these boots and start spilling out. But again, just looking everywhere that you can think that fluid could escape from these things. And I don't see any evidence of fluid leakage, so I'm going to say that this thing is sealed up, and it seemed to turn well as I was rotating that steering wheel lock to lock. So I'm gonna go ahead and at least put the tie rod ends back on and attach those to the wheels and see if with a little resistance it still feels right. And then if that feels right, then I'm gonna go ahead and say this thing's good to go. I'm gonna go ahead and start buttoning up all of the things that we took apart, and I'll bring you along for that. All right, so the next step here is, since I didn't see any leaks with it under no load, I'm gonna go ahead and reattach our tie rod ends. That way it's got a little bit of resistance trying to turn the knuckle and everything. And everybody's got their own opinions on the best way to line all this up. It's going to need an alignment anyway. So what I'm gonna do in order to get this thing just about where it needs to be, since I already have it here in the car, is I'm going to line up as best I can straight forward these rotors, and then I'm going to put this tie rod where it goes, and I'm going to see where that lines up here on our inner tie rod, and then we're going to move this lock nut down to just about there. Okay. Doesn't have to be perfect, okay? And so somewhere around there, that's got lots of meat inside of here, and I'm going to go ahead and count how many rotations it takes to put this tie rod onto the inner tie rod. So we'll move this out here a little bit, and we'll screw this on here. It's kind of difficult to do with one hand, guys, but you get the gist here. There we go. I just got to get started, and then it will go easy. Okay. So there's one rotation, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, let's call it 16, 17. Yeah, let's do 17. All right, 17. And then we'll just go ahead and move this out to sort of not snug it up, but just keep it from moving. And we'll put this back together. Make sure that that looks semi-straight, and it does with the vehicle. All right, so 17 turns, and we're just going to put the other one on the same as we did this side. Okay, the other side we did 17 turns, so we're going to match it here. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. All right, 17 turns, and we'll go ahead and move our little lock nut down there to butt up against it and reinstall this outer tie rod into the knuckle. There we go. Now, I'm not going to torque these yet. I just want to sort of snug them up, and then again, I'm going to go up and I'm going to start the car, and we're going to go lock to lock a few times, trying to get it to draw that fluid into the system, make sure that everything sounds good, everything's moving smoothly, that the power steering's working just right before we go through the hassle again of just doing everything to torque and putting back together the sway bars and all of that. And again, this is just so that we can save ourselves the hassle of having to take everything back apart if there is an issue. Okay, so I went ahead and reconnected our tie rod so that we would be turning the knuckles and the wheels, and I did not refill this anymore, so it's still almost full. And I turned it turned the car on, turned it lock to lock a few times. Still some whining from our power steering pump as it's filling up with fluid. And we're going to lift it up and we're going to check for leaks one more time. Okay, let's check for leaks one more time. The good thing about that Dextron ATF is it's bright red. So if there's a leak, you're going to see it. And you would also see it as, you know, a big old, you know, drip or puddle on the ground. So that should help. And I'm just looking around all my fittings, all my connections, any place that has a seal on this thing, I want to see and make sure that we don't have any leaks. And I'm not seeing any so far. So far so good. That's all good so far. And I'm excited to see that, obviously. And so I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of the steering and suspension back together here and put the wheels back on it and maybe take it for a spin around the block. Okay, so let's put that sway bar back in. So when we took it out, we found that the hex feature on the back side is a 17, and I'm using my really skinny 17mm wrench set to get on that. And then we can go ahead and stick it back through here and then put the nut on, which is an 18mm. And we'll hold the back and buzz that on. Now, I reconnected our outer tie rod here, and unlike when it came in, that was missing the cotter pins, I went ahead and put some cotter pins back in here. And I'll put torque specs for this stuff if I can find it, but put this stuff on there snug, and especially with a little blue Loctite, ought to be good for you for a long time. All right, sway bar end links are back in place, so we're gonna go give it one more good once over, touch everything that we took apart and make sure that we put it back together the way it was and that we torqued it, because we're fixing to take this thing out on the road and we want to make sure that nothing comes apart or falls off while we're doing that. All right, everything's looking good here. Now, if your vehicle had them to begin with, this one did not. There's a belly cover under here, a plastic cover that some of them had and still have. Put that back on. If yours had the wheel well covers, the plastic shields in here, put those back on. This one didn't have it. So just, again, put the things back on that you took off. All right, let's take this thing on the road. Maybe you can hear that. There's still a little bit of whining going on. A little catchiness in the steering wheel here. Ever so often. Obviously, there's still a lot of air in this system we need to work out. So just pulling it out of the bay or pulling it out of the driveway here, it drained down the reservoir. It was getting a little catchy, so we'll go ahead and top that off before we even get started here. Again, this is just ATF Dextron for this vehicle, what it calls for on the cap. And put it a little above max cold for now. Not quite down the pump quite a bit, just doing that. So let's see how this goes. All right, so topping off that reservoir really smoothed out the power steering feel, quieted down our pump, so that's all good. Let's go see if it drank a little bit more. Yeah, it drank down just a little bit more, but it's still at cold max, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave it there and take it for a spin. So going straight down the road, wheels just cocked over just a hair towards 11 o'clock or whatever, but power steering's working good, feels good, nice and quiet. And remember, this vehicle has that solenoid on the side of the power steering gearbox, or the rack and pinion, that controls the orifices inside of that. And so I noticed that it was necessary to get the RPM up just a little bit to get it to kind of move fluid better through the system. So don't think that you can just set it there and idle, or at least not in the 5 minutes that I let it do that, and get the fluid to circulate through the system good. You may have to get it the RPMs up, or maybe take it for a little spin and then check the level again. All right, so back from our little jog around the block. Like I said, going straight, the steering wheel's cocked over just a little bit. That'll get cured whenever they do the alignment. But yeah, it's nice and quiet now. Power steering works really well, so I'm going to put it up on the rack inside the shop one more time, check for leaks, and then, you know, that way I can give it my blessing and call this one done. All right, so let's go back up underneath there and make sure that there's no leaks again. Now remember, we put Dextron ATF as called for on the cap, and it's a bright red fluid, so if it's going to leak, you know, that bright red color will be very visible, either as a drip here on the subframe, a drip here on the ground, and I am not seeing any wetness, and so thank God we got us a fix here. All right, well, I'm going to call that then. I'm going to say that this one is done. Whew. Man, that's kind of a big job, I guess, but you know, it's really doable. You don't have to have a lift. It sure makes things a lot easier, man. And it's taken me 50 years to get it. I love it. Highly recommend it, by the way. But you can do this at home. Save yourself a ton of money. As of right now, that eBay part is working. I'll keep you guys informed if something changes on that. I hope I don't have to do this again. But now that I have done it, there's really not that great of videos out there, and following the service manual as I showed you, you can skip a lot of those steps. So now that I've done it, I know where the shortcuts are, and I shared those with you guys, so I hope you appreciate that. I learned a lot on this. I hope you did too. I hope this helps you out if you unfortunately have to deal with that on one of these Nissan Muranos. But if you do, and this helps you out, do me a favor, hit that like, subscribe, and share with your friends. It really helps the channel to grow and reach other people and help as many as I can. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and God bless.